Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Emerge, the health podcast for busy, high-performing women. I'm your host, Dr. Alex Swenson Ridley, and I'm really excited for today's conversation. I am joined by Gabi Robledo. I knew I was going to mess up your name. Is a flow state and mindset coach who aims to help high performers unlock their inner warrior. She uses a mind, body, spirit approach to help people overcome limiting beliefs, particularly around worthiness, and eliminate subconscious stress and anxiety to experience peak performance, and personal power. She grew up in a very unconventional lifestyle, living in an RV, which is actually where she's joining us from today, and traveling the world with her family of 7 since she was 14 years old. This led her to becoming the co-founder of the blog Nomads with a Purpose, which has grown to be a multimedia adventure, travel, and wellness brand for over 70,000 readers per month. She believes everyone can become a warrior of their highest self through the use of flow state. She helps people expand their consciousness to live a life of more fulfillment and purpose. So Gabi, welcome to the show.
I'm excited to be here. I can't wait to chat with you.
Yeah, so there's so much I'm excited to dive into with you, but I guess your bio provided a little background, but just kind of for our listeners, I like to give some idea of like how you got into doing what you do.
I grew up with a super conventional lifestyle at first. My parents owned a gym in San Diego, and I was homeschooled my whole life. I grew up in a gym, and that led me to become a pretty avid athlete from a young age. And so I was always in these high intensity competitive sports. But at some point, my family got tired of the rat race, and my parents decided to move me and my 4 siblings and I into an RV to travel the world full time. And in doing so, that just totally shifted my life, my whole paradigm, because I was in a world where I was constantly comparing myself to other people. And it wasn't necessarily fulfilling for me. I wasn't necessarily happy. And then when we started traveling the world to primarily outdoor destinations, and we were surfing and rock climbing. And when I started surfing and rock climbing, my mind, it was just everything changed because I discovered flow state, which is what I talk all about. And in discovering flow state, I discovered a sense of intrinsic fulfillment that I had never felt before. And it was particularly interesting because at the time I was 14 when we moved into an RV, and I saw my peers just in a totally different world, in the world of talking about homework and gossip, and he did this, she did that. And there was a part of me that wanted to be accepted by my peer group. And simultaneously, I was like, I can either be accepted or I can do this other thing, pursue flow state and just go against the grain. And I'm actually happier. And so it was kind of this difficult contrast for many years because I wanted to be accepted, but I also found this sense of inner fulfillment. And that's what led me to start having some mindfulness around my belief systems, because I had these belief systems around I had to be accepted to be seen as worthy, and I had to be successful or achievement oriented to be seen as worthy. And so when I started dissecting all that, I started getting more into how can I transition these beliefs to kind of work for me instead of against me. And then simultaneously just living, spending all this time out in nature and deciding that I wanted to pursue this alternative path. My mom and I decided to co-found Nomads with a Purpose, which is our adventure travel and wellness brand. And I was 16 at the time when we did that. And then that kind of completed the puzzle for me, because I realized that flow state gave you this power, it's kind of this bridge point to step into your personal power. And then from that place of personal power, I could start living purposefully with an aim towards trying to make this business succeed from a young age. And so that kind of just slingshotted me forward into becoming an entrepreneur at a young age. And then now building this framework, which I call Flow State Warriors, where I help people step into their personal power and pursue purpose by using flow state as a mind, body, spirit training regime.
Very cool. That's like, your story is awesome. I mean, becoming an entrepreneur when you're 16 is like super cool. And just, tapping into that. And I think so much of your story and just what we're going to talk about applies to so many women. And it's one of the things that, holds so many of us back, especially when we're these overachieving high performers, is I would argue we're not usually connected to our flow state, and we're not achieving in the areas where we're really fulfilled and stepping into our power. And like, that's one of the biggest thing that hinders us and holds us back. So I'm super excited to dive into that conversation. Before we do, because I told you before we started recording, I ask in my paperwork, like how often or how much you spend of your day do you spend in the flow state? And everyone's like, what the heck is the flow state? So can we define that? And then we'll dive into this conversation around worthiness and power.
Yeah, for sure. So flow state, as a general simplistic version of it, is an altered state of consciousness where we are in our peak performance. Now, the only thing I like to look at it as is that peak performance is not necessarily the most stereotypical version of peak performance that you always think of. So a lot of times when we're talking about flow state, you end up thinking of the most elite athletes and the most extreme people. But if you look at what peak performance really means, peak is to the best of your ability. And performance is something that's intrinsic, not extrinsic. Performance is the best that you can bring. And so peak performance is all about really stepping into our highest potential. It's not always about this achievement-oriented world that we're typically drawn towards. And that's actually pretty much what flow state is all about. It's about coming into a place of intrinsic creativity, intrinsic desire, and intrinsic fulfillment, rather than doing it for something external out there, for like affirmation, validation, or some status that we are often taught that we need to achieve.
I love it. And it's so hard to let go of that status or that, I've shared the story on the show. I built a 7-figure business based on extrinsic stuff, and it didn't fulfill me at all. And the day I realized that was kind of rough. So, I know
Yeah.
so many women listening to this are probably in that space where they don't even really know how to connect intrinsically. So
Absolutely. And so in the process of flow state is an interesting thing because it's both the means of achieving the thing, but it's also the result. Because when you start doing the thing, which is flow state, you realize, wait, this is what I want. I don't necessarily need to have things in my external world because it's already the emotional state that I've been trying to achieve so long is already within me.
I love it. And that's really powerful just to think about. Like, you don't need all the stuff around you that we tend to associate with. And I think you really exemplify that just by traveling around the world living in an RV. Like, you guys don't have a home address or anything, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, absolutely, we don't have a home address. And I think because we made the decision to move into an RV before we kind of became aware. And when I say we, I mean my parents, because of course they were the big influence in the lifestyle. And we just made the decision first. And after the fact, we realized we kind of put the label on what that pull was, because I think we all kind of have that general pull, like there's got to be more to life than just obtaining the status of things, because my parents, they had achieved the business and they had raised 5 kids and they had the house and with the pool and the barbecue, all the things, and they're like, we're not happy. So that's what made them decide to do it. And then it just was constantly ingrained to us in our childhood to like, what makes you happy? What are you passionate about? And then from that place of passion, now let's look at your future and think about what's going to fulfill you in your future life and in your present.
So powerful and sounds so simple. And yet I know it's so hard for so many of us. So let's
Absolutely.
where do you start with this? And I know you mentioned self-worth, and there's a lot of that conversation that goes into this, because it can be scary and it can be confronting and challenging. And a lot of the women I coach and work with, I tend to work with and those who listen to the show are we're high achievers. We have careers as well as families, and we have some level of identity that's wrapped up in those things, and we've probably pushed ourselves because on some level we don't feel like we have self-worth. So how do we start to powerfully step into what it is that really drives and fulfills us?
All right. So this has multiple facets to it. So
Yeah.
The whole, I guess, framework of going through this flow feeling of fulfillment and flow state and purpose is kind of this, I think of it as like an infinity symbol that you're constantly working towards, because you're going to always work through the discipline side of it. And that's where entrepreneurs tend to be good at being disciplined. Like, I got to sit down, I got to do all this work, and I got to make a plan for my business and be strategic about it. But then there's a sense of surrender that comes from, that's a little bit more, involves your spirit in your mind and less about being actually in the body and doing the things. And so you're going to you work between multiple facets. And so the first facet is working constantly on your belief system. So how do you get to a place of sense of worthiness first, right? And it starts by simply becoming present first, because if you can't be present first, then you can't even notice the beliefs that are coming up. And whenever I'm coaching people, I always have them spend at least a week, if not a month, going through every single day and writing down what their thoughts are when they're triggered, because the triggers are, of course, our biggest indicators of what our self-limiting beliefs are. Because where we have anger or fear or sadness, at the root of that, you're going to find your unworthiness. And that's a big thing to think about, because a lot of people, and maybe in your community, people are more aware of unworthiness beliefs, but a lot of people try to hide the fact they have unworthiness beliefs. That's why I talk about it so much, because people are still so like not willing to admit that they're unworthy, which is a really powerful sign that you probably feel even more unworthy. So looking at all the things that make you angry in a day. Anger is such a powerful indicator of this. And then writing down your thoughts, saying, this scenario happened in my life and it triggered me because I thought this, or it made me feel like this. Kind of like the most simplistic form of journaling almost, but just trying to keep it, simple. And from that, you ask yourself why. Why did this saying that someone said to me make me feel that way? Because at the root of that, that's when you start to notice your specific beliefs. And then, like, let's say, you're getting in an argument with someone about money. You say, well, why does this conversation about money make me angry? Well, because I feel like I don't have enough money. Well, why do you feel like you don't have enough money? Because I feel like I don't deserve money. And then that's when anytime you get to a deservingness thing that's coming from unworthiness. I mean, most things I tell people, like 90% of beliefs come back to a belief that you are unworthy of that thing. And so that's the starting point of working with your unworthiness beliefs, becoming present and starting to notice them, because from that point, you stop running autopilot. As soon as you catch the thought and you turn it into an awareness, you can't run autopilot, because our brains are addicted to negative belief systems. We have the negative thought, and our brain is chemically addicted to the negative feeling that it conjures in our body. And so we stay in that thought pattern. But if we stop it when we're feeling it in our physical bodies, because all thoughts trigger feelings, then that's when you begin to shift, because it sounds simple to just, you solve it by bringing awareness to it, but it really does. And then from that awareness, you just catch it. You catch it faster and faster, because at first it's a slow process. And so the second facet to this is actual flow state. So, you said that you're, I guess in your paperwork, that people don't know what flow state is.
Yeah.
So flow state is not always, like I said, something super intense. Flow state is the combination of creativity and power. So anything that you are pushing yourself in, but also bringing this sense of creativity to it, then that's flow state. And so that starts by looking at what makes you feel creative. And so creativity can be something that aligns with your business, but it doesn't always have to be. A lot of people think that they have to have their business be everything, right? I was definitely caught up in that for a while, but then you put too much pressure on it, and so then it's not creative. And so finding things that make you feel creative outside of that is extremely important. So it can be an artistic form, but it can also be movement. I always encourage people, if they're not artistic types of people, to that, like martial arts, gymnastics, movement that makes you feel expressive, but also challenges you on either an intellectual level or a physical level, is a great starting point to get into that flow state.
I love it. And I was just thinking, from my own life, examples of flow state things like that I've experienced, just to share with everybody, to have some examples. Like, I've been playing the violin since I was 5, so for 30 plus years. And I'll get into a moment with that where, like, especially when I joined a worship team and just kind of like riffed and didn't have music to follow, and just, we're like totally dive into flow state, right? I get like that when I'm running too. And I'm yoga, like there's so many different ways you can do it. And I find, do you have any recommendations? Because I find this with a lot of the women I work with, like we're so disconnected from ourselves and we focus on everyone and everything else except ourselves. I call this selfless syndrome. We talk about it on the show a lot, but like a lot of them don't even know what their hobbies are or what those things might be. So do you have any tips for like exploring that side of yourself?
Yeah. So the first one I like to share is that a lot of times we don't find our creative inspiration because we don't have enough quiet time. And I'm sure if you're a mom, particularly, you have no time, right? And
Right.
the only problem with this is that a lot of times, and I've done this for many, many years, I make excuses for all the reasons I don't have time instead of actually laying out my schedule and looking at all the places where I could fit in just 10 minutes, just 10 minutes. And in those 10 minutes, I encourage people to sit down and meditate. And I don't know if meditation is something that you've talked about in this podcast before, but meditation opens up so many possibilities, because what happens is we're stuck in our beta brainwaves far too much of our lives. And if you wake up first thing in the morning and you're thinking about your to-do list, and I got to take my kids to school at this time, or I got to start work by this time and I have a meeting at this time, and you spend your entire waking hours in that beta state, the beta brainwave is inherently a productive state, but it's inherently not, you're not able to be creative in that state. And creativity comes after, like the actual act of creativity comes after you find the creative inspiration. So what I recommend people do is try to make 10 minutes. If you don't have 10 minutes, even just finding 5 minutes every single day to sit down and meditate, because meditation brings you into your alpha brainwave. And when you slow down your brainwave from beta into alpha, alpha is inherently your creative state. And in that, you're going to find something that is a calling toward wanting to create something.
I love it. And that's so true. And I've talked a lot, all of you listening, like this is where morning routines come in to be really, really helpful. It doesn't mean you have to get up at 5 a.m., but having that dedicated time, like I usually read something in the morning before I look at anything else. Like I leave my phone on airplane mode because I don't have books anymore, but I have, stuff on my phone. And whether it's like just for fun or the Bible or, a business book or like just something to engage my brain in more of an intellectual stimulation and more that creative flow before I start thinking about it. And so that's, that's one way. You don't have to meditate, but like do something that kind of gets
absolutely something that's in your own intrinsic world, because we're so quick to be in this external world of what's happening out here. And that just inherently puts you into your beta brainwave. And the other interesting part is that I like to encourage people to do it, like you said, as a morning routine or as an evening routine, because there are the 5 brainwaves that we go through in our day naturally, and delta is our deepest sleep, and theta is when we're falling asleep at night. But we go through an alpha phase every single day, and it's not about making time to, I guess, like have this separate secluded time to be in creativity, but it's about just lengthening the time that you're already going to go through alpha, because it's natural.
Yeah. And I'm just thinking through, like, I think a lot of us are probably so focused on the extrinsic world, especially those of you listening to the show, that like, you don't even realize that you have this, time where your brain's going through these brainwaves, but we probably don't pay enough attention or even give credence to it to tap into that. So.
Yeah, and the other interesting one is that's why people who have truly packed schedules, when I'm working with people who are just like, I don't have enough time, I'm telling you, I don't have enough time, I tell them to listen to guided meditations when they fall asleep at night, because in fact, sometimes it's even more effective, but you do have to bring some level of awareness to your thoughts first, because when you're falling asleep at night, you're falling into theta brainwaves, and theta is our very influential state in our behaviors, because it's the subconscious mind. So when you're in your theta brainwave, you're very easily influenced by the sounds you hear and the colors you see. And so if you're just exhausted going throughout your day and you don't even have space to be in that alpha state, sometimes it's helpful to go straight to approach it via the theta brainwave. And start training your brain with positive reinforcement of the ways you want to start thinking and creating and being.
That's very interesting. And that's why some of the learning I've done and whatnot, they have like study cliff notes you can listen to before you fall asleep, because it actually helps your brain like integrate the information on a subconscious level where you don't have to actively think about it. And
that's totally the same idea.
Yeah. So our brains are so interesting.
So interesting.
There's so much to learn, but taking some of this and just starting somewhere, I think is the important piece.
And the other one is like, because you were asking about, for people who don't know where to express their creativity, you got to try everything. Like you're going to find something that sets your soul on fire. I've never met anyone who hasn't found their thing. And I know a lot of moms who just forget what that thing is too, because a lot of people have it when they're younger, and then you're just getting busy with life, and you forget that you had something when you were younger that did that to you, that set your soul on fire.
Yeah. And it can be fun and exciting. I know some people like grown and are like, I don't know where to start. Yeah. But you get to go on this like exploratory thing to reconnect to a side of yourself you probably haven't seen since you were a kid. So
yeah, absolutely.
yeah.
And there's a sense of curiosity too, like anything that triggers curiosity. So it might not be like, okay, I want you to go paint today, and then go draw today, and then go try this movement today. Sometimes it can be learning. Learning can stimulate new neural pathways, and if you just get new neural pathways to click, then all of a sudden you're going to start connecting dots in new ways, because they're not going to run the exact same traffic pattern. I think of the neural pathways like a roadway, right?
Yeah.
And if you just go one block differently, you're going to see that, oh, there's a restaurant on this corner, metaphorically speaking.
Yeah.
And now you're going to want to start pursuing, let me go down this road a little bit further and see what's down that way. And I'm going to make a right turn down this street. And all of a sudden you're finding this creative sense of being. And you're literally, to be creative is to create new neural pathways.
Yeah. I love that. Because we're bringing science to the, whole right brain conversation, which is it's very important. I had a thought just in that we'll come back to. Let's just kind of recap and then see if there's more stuff we want to dive into with this conversation. But, and we might want to circle back to the self-worth conversation, but, just getting to the identifying, connecting with ourselves enough to recognize where our self-worth is, at play, or maybe driving us to do things that aren't in line with who we really are, and not connecting us. And then we have connecting to that flow state, which we get to through creativity, it sounds like, or, at the very least, like doing something when you're falling asleep, so your theta waves start thinking in that way. And then is there a next step to this, or where do we go from here?
So, I mean, once you enter that state of when you're trying to shift into flow state, you're also trying to shift into your worthiness. So maybe we'll dive a little bit more into the worthiness part.
Yeah.
To really shift your sense of worthiness, or I guess maybe let's go the other way. To enter flow state, you have to be fully aligned with oneself. And to be aligned with yourself is to be out of that beta, but it's also to be removed from your state of self-consciousness. And I know personally that in my life, I used to constantly just enter situations, and I was always worried about how other people were perceiving me. And I was never fully in my body to actually be the most creative expression of myself. And it also held me back from being peak performance in my athletic pursuits and in my business. I was so worried about how other people were going to perceive me in how I showed up on social media, how I showed up in my brand. And then I wasn't being my full authentic self. So self-consciousness has to be shifted into alignment with yourself. Well, how do you shift into alignment with yourself? You have to choose who you want to be in the first place, rather than letting the world dictate how you're going to show up. And so this part is really as simple as taking the time to sit down and decide who you really want to be. And so I start by having people look at a big list of all the different possible character traits, and you decide who you really want to be by narrowing down to like 10 or 5 or even 3 of the most important aspects of yourself that you want to show up in the world as. And then the equally as important part of this, where you really cultivate worthiness, is by choosing what you really value in yourself. Because unworthiness is about feeling like I'm invaluable as a person. We feel like, and unworthiness can also look like a dialogue of I'm not like lovable enough, but it's all essentially the same, in which you don't believe you yourself as a person is valuable enough. And so then we show up in our business trying to prove our value. We try to show up in in all the ways in our life, trying to show the world, look how valuable I am. So why is it that we all think that we're so invaluable, even though values are what we choose? And the reason for that is because we don't actually choose our values a lot of the time. And so I always have people, when they're working through this sense of unworthiness, you have to choose your values. And there's no wrong answer, other than it has to be something intrinsic, because a lot of times we don't realize it, but we have a value on something extrinsic that we have no control over. So if I used to be an avid athlete, but I was constantly upset that I didn't have the results I wanted. And that's because I put value on if I got first place or not. And if I constantly had my value on the achievement is something outside of myself. So I'm never going to be truly fulfilled. And so I shifted that to be, well, when I show up to compete, or if I want to do well in my sports, I value my potential. If I'm pushing myself to my fullest potential, then I'm proud of myself. But if I don't, then it's okay to you can still fall short on your own values, but you're always going to have something that you can control. And more often than not, you're going to end up feeling worthy in all the situations you show up in your life, rather than having this unrealistic expectation of hoping something out there is going to fulfill something within. And bringing it back to flow state, if we want to enter flow state, we have to be aligned with ourselves, and we have to be aligned with those values and who we really want to be in the first place.
There's so much that you just said in there. Like, mic drop. I talk about this, and probably not enough in the programs I do with women, but like, there's so much profound about what you've just said, in like, to really step into our power and be who we are meant to be, and be healthy, and like be all the things that we want to be. It starts with that. I call it, it's, in some ways it's identity, but like, your identity is your values and what you place on that. And like you said, so many of us are putting it on external things. It's on the house and the husband and your partner, the job, the business, like all this stuff outside of you. And it's so powerful when you can just bring that inside. And I talk a lot about, where our truth comes from. And so it's aligning yourself with whatever that is, and then just living from that place.
Yeah, so spot on. And identity is absolutely what it is. Instead of letting the world dictate your identity, deciding it from within, from a soul level, decide what the intention is of who you want to bring to this life, to this world. And then the other part of this that's interesting is the way that a lot of people can't get quite to that point where they're choosing their values. I don't really know, and I don't really know who I want to be. And that's where like the meditation comes in, because if you can't get to that place of self-reflection, it's just you're overusing that beta brainwave. It's like, sometimes it makes it simple, like, oh, it's not just me, it's just how the brain is wired, and the brain becomes addicted to that beta brainwave. And on top of that, this whole unworthiness cycle, the ego plays such an important role. And I like to think of the ego as the bodyguard, right? And the bodyguard constantly tells ourselves stories and makes up false identities to keep us protected from the feeling of unworthiness. Because in the ego mind, which I usually associate with kind of the primal brain, because the ego is just theoretical, but as a literal place in the brain, I usually think of it as the primal brain. And the primal brain wants to protect us from death. It wants to keep us in survival. And so, but our primal brain perceives any sort of social rejection, any sort of shame, which is really unworthiness. It perceives all that shame as the equivalent to life threatening. And so it really all plays together in that, yes, you got to choose your values, but also it's really, really important to, like I said in the beginning, to just bring awareness to those moments when your brain is just starts running autopilot on somebody said something bad about me, or honestly, a lot of times our shame comes from things that people didn't say or things that didn't happen, and we start making up stories, which is how the ego gets power. And all of a sudden our ego is just being overused on autopilot. And so it's really about balancing what I call in my programs all the 5 minds that we have. We have the heart's mind, we have the rational mind, we have the intuitive mind, we have the etheric mind, and then the ego mind. And the ego mind is just so dominant in our lives because we're not getting into the spaces where we can be in the other minds, which really happens when we're in alpha brainwaves and theta brainwaves.
Super interesting. So if you're taking anything from this, ladies, it's like super simplify it down. It's, we've got to stop long enough to connect to ourselves in a different state of being and allow that to be expressed. And that involves making some changes, honestly, and, really just thinking about it. But when we're in this just go, society and drive, and it's like, you leave the house at 7 a.m. and don't get home till 11 o'clock at night because of kids' activities and all that. Like, we've got to find the way, kind of like what you shared with schedules and whatnot, like find the space, make the time, because that's really where healing comes from too. So
yeah, and my because I work with clients, but my mom also does something very similar to me. She also coaches people on empowerment in just a slightly different way. And she was working with a mom the other day, and she's same does not have time, and we've been encouraging her to get her to meditate, and she's like, I just don't have time. I just don't have time to meditate. And she found time to meditate when she was sitting in the car waiting for her kids to come out of sport. So it really just goes to show that you can make time for those 10 minutes if you just start to prioritize it, even if it's like feels inconvenient. You're like, someone's going to walk by my car and see me meditating inside. And so there's like a sense of prioritizing your time and making time for just the littlest bit, because it really can make a huge difference.
Instead of reaching for your phone, just quiet yourself for a minute.
Yeah,
absolutely. So in wrapping this up, first, where can people connect with you? And
so on Instagram, I'm Gabi Robledo _. It's GABIROBLEDO, and GabiRobledo.com. You can learn more about all my meditations and breath works that I guide people through and all my different programs. And then on YouTube, my sister and my mom and I have a brand that we work together with. And it's Making Mindfulness Fun. And we just talk about how you can make time in your life to be mindful and how to really awaken your highest self.
Awesome. And I'll put all those in the show notes and make sure people have access to that. But any final words? I mean, you've packed like bombshells and tons of wisdom, and just like for how young you are, I'm really impressed with the kind of level that you live life at. But any final parting thoughts that you have for our listeners today?
Let's see. I think it's my last thing would be just you have the time in your life to really be the warrior that is within you. I believe everyone that has the spirit of a warrior within them, and a warrior is not someone who's fighting the battles out there. A warrior is the one that it's the voice inside our own heads, because I think the biggest battle we have to face is actually the one inside our own minds, because we are really our biggest enemy to an extent. We are set up to have this negativity bias. We are set up for failure in so many ways, just on a neurological level, that we have to take control over our minds if we want to live the best version of our lives that we really can. And it's absolutely possible to live your dream life, to have everything that you desire, but you have to start by taking control of your mind first. And that starts by being aware of what goes through your mind. And that starts small. If you just notice one thought a day, that's huge. But eventually you'll start to get good at the practice of noticing your thoughts. And soon you're going to be aware of your thoughts at every moment of every day. And when you reach that place of mastery of your mind, you are unlimited, because if you have awareness of your mind at that level, you can shift your mind in any way you want. When you can shift your mind to work for you instead of against you, your body starts to work for you, not against you. And your life you become the magnetic attractor of all the things that you desire in your physical reality. And frankly, at that point, all the things you desire in your physical reality are just a natural byproduct, because you're going to be feeling this sense of fulfillment that comes when you control your energy and your mind.
Awesome. I love it. Gabi, thank you so much for joining us and just sharing your, I don't even know what to call it, but it was awesome. Your awesomeness. Thank you for sharing your awesomeness with us and our listeners.
Well, thank you for having me on. It was nice to chat with you about all this.
Absolutely.